Last week in chapter 28, we saw how Jacob left his home in Beersheba to go to Haran, where his mother's family came from. And he's going there, one reason is to escape from Esau and Esau's desire to kill Jacob, to escape from the anger of Esau and his desire for revenge after Jacob had deprived him of the birthright and the blessing. And the other reason for him to go to Haran is to find a wife for himself. Rebekah had expressed her displeasure that Esau had married Hittite women, and so she urged Isaac to send Jacob to her own family, to Laban, her brother, in Haran, where he would be able to find a wife there. And Jacob began that journey from Beersheba towards Haran, and when he arrived at a place which he would name Bethel, he experienced that dream in which he saw that stairway leading between earth and heaven and the angels going up and down. And Jacob was surprised that he found God in that place, and he named that place Bethel, meaning the house of God. And so he carried on his journey from there. And this is where we pick up the story now in Genesis chapter 29. So we read chapter 29 here, verses 1 to 14. We can see on the map there the route, a rough idea of the route that Jacob would have followed on this journey from Beersheba through Bethel and on to Haran. So verse 20, chapter 29 says this: Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field. And lo, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it, for out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place upon the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, My brothers, where do you come from? They said, We are from Haran. He said to them, Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? They said, We know him. He said to them, Is it well with him? They said, It is well. And see, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep. He said, Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the animals to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them. But they said, We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together, and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well, then we water the sheep. While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. Now when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. When Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, Surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him a month. So after that meeting with God at Bethel and being strengthened by the promise God made of his presence with Jacob, Jacob continued his journey to the east. The literal translation of the phrase in verse 1 there is that he lifted up his feet. So that gives the sense that he's now traveling with purpose, that he's lifted up his feet and he's going on with this journey. And he came to the land of the people of the east. And that phrase would refer to the people of Mesopotamia, people who lived beyond the river Euphrates, be known as the people of the east. When he arrived in the vicinity of Haran, where he's heading for, he saw a well in a field and noticed 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it, waiting to be watered. The mouth to this well was covered by a large stone, and when all of the flocks were gathered, then the shepherds would roll the stone away and water their flocks. And when they had finished, they would put the stone back. The stone would help to keep the water clean and fresh and prevent anything from falling into the well which might contaminate the water. Jacob approached the shepherds who were there at the well, and he addressed them as my brothers. He asked them where they came from, and they told him they were from Haran, which of course is the place Jacob is traveling to. He asked them if they knew Laban, the son, or more accurately, the grandson of Nahor, and they said that they did know him. So Jacob asked if all was well with Laban. He uses the word shalom there, meaning is there peace with him? And shalom is a word which means more than simply peace. It has the sense of well-being, prosperity, and completeness. So is everything well with Laban? Is he prospering? Is he complete? And they assured Jacob that all was well with Laban. And at that moment, Laban's daughter Rachel was approaching the well with her sheep, and the shepherds pointed her out to Jacob. In verse 6, see, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep. Jacob then observed that it was still high day, or still noon, the hottest part of the day, and this was not the time for the sheep to be gathered together in this way. Jacob sort of seems to take over a bit here with things. Normally the sheep would all be gathered together in the evening, and then they would go into the sheepfold for the night. But here they all are being gathered together at this time. So Jacob tells them to water their sheep and then put them out to pasture again. So he's sort of seems to be trying to take over affairs here. However, the shepherds explained that they had to wait until all of the sheep were gathered, and then the well would be opened, and then they could water their sheep. So it seems that they all came together at the same time for this watering to take place, that they would just open the well, and then when the sheep had been finished watering, then they would close it up again. Whilst Jacob was discussing this with the shepherds, then Rachel arrived, and she came with her father's sheep. Her name, Rachel, means ewe, as in E-W-E, the female sheep. So perhaps she has that name because that was her job, looking after the sheep. When Jacob saw Rachel, now knowing who she was, knowing that she was Laban's daughter, and these were Laban's sheep, because the other shepherds have told him about this, he went and he rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well, and he watered the sheep for her. It would have taken much physical strength to roll this large stone away, so perhaps he didn't do it on his own, but he was helping the other shepherds to move this stone. And so Jacob then took over and watered the sheep for Rachel. Jacob greeted her with affection. He kissed Rachel. He wept aloud, or lifted up his voice, no doubt feeling a great sense of relief that he had finally arrived safely at his destination, and he had successfully met up with someone from Laban's family, from his own mother's family. So Jacob introduced himself to Rachel then, telling her that he was her father's kinsman. He was Rebekah's son, which would make them cousins. Rachel, on hearing this, she ran home to tell her father about all of this. And then when Laban was informed, he too ran to meet Jacob, and he embraced him and kissed him, gave him that greeting, and brought him into his house. Jacob then was able to tell Laban his whole story, and Laban said, surely you are my bone and my flesh. Recognizing that Jacob is family, he's a near relative. You are my bone and my flesh. And so, having been warmly welcomed in this way, then Jacob stayed with Laban for a month. We read on in the story now from verses 15 to 30. We see the continuation here. And Laban said to Jacob, because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be? Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful and lovely. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than that I should give any other man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, that I may go into her, for my time is completed. So Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her maid. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? Laban said, it is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years. Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to wife. He gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her maid. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. So whilst Jacob was staying there with Laban, he started working for him. However, he's not being paid any wages. So Laban didn't want to seem to be taking advantage of his family relationship with Jacob. He says, because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? And so he offered to pay Jacob some wages for his service, and he asked him, tell me, what shall your wages be? Laban's actions here may not be as gracious or generous as perhaps they appear to be. Perhaps he knew that Jacob was in love with Rachel and would want to marry her, but Jacob has nothing to offer as a dowry. All he can offer is his labor. So in asking Jacob to name his own wages, Laban is really hoping that Jacob, or what Jacob offers, will be favorable to Laban. We now learn that Laban actually has 2 daughters, and the eldest is named Leah, whilst Rachel is the youngest. And the 2 girls are contrasted in verse 17 here. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was. It's not clear exactly what the text means here by describing Leah's eyes as weak. The word translated as weak could also be translated as delicate or soft. The Authorized Version translates the phrase as tender-eyed, which would be more of a compliment. So perhaps her eyes were attractive, that this was her one notable feature. In contrast, though, Rachel is described as being beautiful and lovely. So perhaps in her overall appearance, she is beautiful and lovely, whereas Leah's one notable feature is the attractiveness of her eyes. Now, since Jacob loved the younger daughter Rachel, then he made this offer to serve Laban for 7 years in exchange for her hand in marriage. And Laban really does rather well out of this. Laban is really taking advantage of the situation, and he's in effect reducing Jacob to the status of a hired servant. Jacob has no dowry to offer. The normal thing would be for the prospective husband to offer his prospective wife's family a dowry, but Jacob has nothing to offer, and all he can offer is his labor, which is what Laban agrees to. So Laban makes this agreement, and he says that he would rather Rachel be given to Jacob in marriage than to any other man. So Jacob stayed on, and he served Laban for these 7 years for Rachel. So Laban gets 7 years worth of labor out of this arrangement. And verse 20 says, those 7 years seemed to him but a few days because of the love that he had for her. So Jacob's love for Rachel was such that those 7 years just seemed to fly by, as if they were just a few days. So when the 7 years had passed, then Jacob went to Laban to ask for his wife, and perhaps there's something in that he had to go and ask rather than Laban going to him and telling him, well, your time's up, but you've done 7 years, here's your wife. It's Jacob who has to go and make that appeal to Rachel, appeal to Laban to ask for Rachel. So Laban then arranged a marriage feast. He gathered together the local population and prepared this feast for to celebrate the marriage. However, come the evening, Laban brought Leah to Jacob, and not knowing what Laban had done, Jacob then consummated the marriage, presuming that he was with Rachel. We may wonder, well, how could that be? How could he not have known? Well, she's probably wearing a veil, and in the darkness of that time, that would conceal her identity as well. So Jacob didn't know that this was Leah. And that it was only in the following morning, that the deceit was discovered. And so Jacob then goes to confront Laban. He says, what is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? Jacob had become the victim of a deceptive trick, just as he had tricked his own father and brother in order to obtain the birthright and the blessing. So he's really reaping what he had sown. In response to Jacob's complaint, Laban simply says, well, it's not the custom here for the younger daughter to be given in marriage before the firstborn. The firstborn should be the one who gets married first. And that's still the case in some cultures around the world today, that it's expected that the firstborn would be the first to get married. Perhaps Laban's reference here to the rights of the firstborn would have also struck Jacob as well, being as Jacob has obtained the rights of the firstborn in a deceptive way. And the disappointment that Jacob had inflicted upon Esau, it now comes back upon him. Laban tells Jacob to complete this week-long marriage ceremony to Leah. The ceremony the celebrations would go on for a week. So finish the week with Leah. He said, I will give you Rachel in exchange for a further 7 years service. So Laban had the upper hand here, and if Jacob really wanted to marry Rachel, then he had no other option but to agree to these terms. And so he completed this week of celebration with Leah, and at the end of the week he was given Rachel as his wife, and we're told that he loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. A man's marriage to two living sisters is something that would later be forbidden under the law of Moses in Leviticus chapter 18 and verse 18, which is a part of a longer passage about these forbidden relationships. And chapter 18 verse 18 of Leviticus says, and you shall not take a woman as a rival wife to her sister, uncovering her nakedness while her sister is yet alive. So whilst two sisters are still living, they could not be married to the same man. Although that's something that came in under the law of Moses, but not applying in this case for Jacob. Laban, we're told, had given Leah his maid Zilpah to be her maid, and he gave Rachel his maid Bilhah to be her maid. And again, this is the normal sort of arrangement that would be made in that culture at that time. And the maids are introduced here and named for us because they would later become the mothers of some of Jacob's sons, as we'll find out later. So Jacob was now obliged to serve Laban for a further 7 years. So Laban has done rather well out of all of this. He's taken this opportunity to marry off his eldest daughter Leah, who perhaps he thought he might find difficulty in getting a husband, so he's managed to marry her off, and he's got 14 years of service out of Jacob instead of the 7 that Jacob had originally offered. Reading on here then in verse 31 down to the end of the chapter, it goes on to say this: when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son, and said, now this time my husband will be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. Jacob then had been tricked into marrying Leah, whom he didn't really love. He loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. And so this situation was bound to lead to problems within the family. And we're given an account here which goes from chapter 29, verse 31 through to chapter 24 of verse 24 of chapter 30, in which we're told of the births of 12 of Jacob's children. We have here 11 sons and 1 daughter. And the account here is arranged in the order of their births. So there are 4 sons who are born to Leah, and then there are 2 sons born to Rachel's maid Bilhah, and then 2 sons are born to Leah's maid Zilpah, and 2 more sons and a daughter are born to Leah, and then finally 1 son is born to Rachel, and that would be Joseph. Rachel will have 1 more son, Benjamin, later on in the story. That's after they have left Laban and gone back to the land of Canaan, and Rachel, as you may recall, dies in childbirth, giving birth to Benjamin. But these 11 sons and 1 daughter are born there in Haran, whilst Jacob is serving Laban. The names that are given to the sons are interesting as they reflect the circumstances of their births and how their mothers felt about these events. So we have in the closing verses of chapter 30, verses 31 to 35, the birth of Leah's first 4 sons. We're told here that the Lord knew that Jacob did not love Leah. The verse 31 says, when the Lord saw that Leah was hated. Hated is perhaps a strong term. It doesn't mean a sort of active hatred or hostility towards her, but rather in a sense of less affection, that he loved her to a lesser degree. And so the Lord knew Leah's circumstances, and so he comforted her by giving her the ability to have children. Opening her womb is how the text put it here, and it allows her to bear children. But in contrast, we're told that Rachel was barren, just as Sarah had been barren and Rebecca had also been barren. So at this point, Rachel is barren as well. Leah conceived, and her first son, who's Jacob's firstborn, his first child, was named Reuben. Leah has given the child this name because she said, the Lord has looked upon my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. The name Reuben means see a son, and Leah hoped that by giving Jacob a son, by producing a son, that he would now love her. But that did not happen. So Leah then had a second son, whom she named Simeon. And again, she explains the name of this child. She says, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. So again, she sees it as a sort of compensation that she's not really loved by Jacob, but the Lord is aware, and so the Lord has blessed her with another son. So it's the birth of her second son is God's response to the way in which Leah has been treated by Jacob. And the name Simeon means heard. So the idea is that the Lord has heard about my circumstances. Leah then gives birth to a third son, whom she names Levi, which means joined. And she gave the child this name, thinking, now this time my husband will be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. So again, Leah hoped that the birth of her third son would bring Jacob closer to her in affection. I've given him 3 sons. Surely now he will feel some sense of affection towards me, that he will want to be joined to me. But again, it's that doesn't happen, and Leah then gives birth to a 4th son, whom she names Judah. Judah meaning praise, because she says, this time I will praise the Lord. It's almost as if she's given up seeking to win Jacob's affections, that by bearing him all of these sons, she hasn't won his affection. And so now she will just praise the Lord. So praise the Lord, because he has given me these sons. And then we're told that after the birth of Judah, she ceased bearing children, at least for the time being. That doesn't necessarily mean that she was unable to bear children after that moment, but perhaps that Jacob was no longer interested in her and didn't want to be with her, to bear any more children, at least for the time being. So it's rather a sad story for Leah. The names of the children here reflect her efforts to try to win the affection of Jacob, and that just doesn't seem to work for her, that his affections are set on Rachel and not Leah, and yet he has these children by Leah as well. We'll finish here at this point. The account of the children of Jacob continues on into chapter 30, which we will go on to look at next week. But there's a few questions we might think about connected with tonight's chapter. If we reap what we sow, how did Jacob reap what he had sown? Paul speaks of us reaping what we sow in Galatians. So how did Jacob reap what he had sown? And then what do the names of Leah's children show us about her situation? Again, what general lessons can we learn for ourselves from this chapter? So we'll stop there, and if there are any thoughts or comments, I see